For those who are new, I'm Semida Silveira. I'm from Cornell University and member of the Council of Engineers for the Energy Transition under the Secretary General of the United Nations. And we've been discussing about clean cooking here today. We have talked about the need for action. We have talked about the technologies are there, but we need the policy environment and we need the political leadership to make things happen. And of course, we also heard from many of our panelists and our presenters about the money, the need for funding. So in this panel now, we are going to discuss financing, and we're discussing finance for innovative clean cooking solutions. And we have a fantastic panel here. I will pass the word to my colleague. I'll pass the word to my colleague Ash Sharman, who is the head of Modern Cooking Facility for Africa and the vice president of the Nordic Environment Finance Corporation, NEFCO, to lead this panel. Ash, please.
Okay, thank you so much, Semida. And thank you also to the organizers for this invitation. And thank you to everyone who's here on more or less on time. I know there's a big line upstairs, so thank you for attending. So I think we've got a great panel here. We've got a great mix of experts, practitioners, financiers, market enablers, people who are very familiar with the issues that we're trying to address. And what I'd like to talk about this afternoon really is to draw on the experience of our colleagues here to talk about a number of issues relating to innovative financing. And of course, I think with a real emphasis on private finance. I think there's an important role to be played for public finance to de-risk, to bring in some of these investors, but the heavy lifting in terms of real investment is going to come from the private sector. So just to bear that in mind. We'll also talk a little bit about carbon finance, because carbon finance is private money. It is new money, as we'll learn. I think it's important to note that, and we want to look at ways in which we can mobilize that also. So just to say that, we have, in essence, 3 questions. I'm not going to ask these questions to you directly, but I hope that you'll all address them in your responses. We don't have a lot of time, but we hopefully will have a lot of very pithy interventions from our esteemed guests here and colleagues. So what I'd really like you to look at is how can we bridge the substantial funding gap? We know there's not enough money coming into this sector. How can we bridge that gap in the clean cooking sector? We've seen a lot of money flowing on the electricity side, the other side of the SDG 7 coin, but less so, significantly less so in the clean cooking area. What kind of innovative financing mechanisms can we use? And which mechanisms are currently working? What's working at the moment? Which are effective in attracting particularly private investment? And also maybe just to touch on that issue of the role of public financing. How can public financing in limited quantities help to mobilize and leverage funding? The other thing is, as I mentioned, carbon finance. We know that climate finance is an important topic going forwards. We're going to see that in COP28. It's going to be very prominent. But in terms of carbon finance and the use of the carbon markets, I'd love to hear from you guys on your experiences there. And finally, the role, as I mentioned, private finance, but also the role of public-private partnership in this and the financial instruments. How can they be used to leverage and unlock some of the broader social development goals that we're talking about here, the SDGs that we've touched upon, and I believe we'll touch upon more in the next session. So how do we address some of the other issues around gender equality? How do we attract investment also? So these are the kinds of topics that we have here. So thank you once again for your attention and for being here. But I think I'll move initially to Faith. I think, Faith, if you could tell us from the perspective of your program, the EEP, which has been very active in this area. I know you manage your portfolio of projects in sub-Saharan Africa. If you could let us have some of your your wisdom on this topic, please.
Thank you, Ash. I think just to start off, EEP Africa, in every way, public finance. I think as an open trust fund, we get our funding from the governments of Austria, Finland, Denmark, and just had Norway join. And we invest in early stage companies in clean energy, agnostic, but we're also looking at clean cooking. And we do that through grant funding of up to 500,000 euros and also repairable grants of up to €1 million. And we're operating in 15 countries in East and Southern Africa. And the role of public financing in that case, from my experience, has been, number one, de-risking these very early stage companies, and at that very beginning of the innovation, being able to give them funding to get started in new markets, try out different business models, and then thereafter they can reach proof of concept and be able to unlock private financing. I think a great example would be Ban and BioLite 10 years ago, got funding from us, and now you can see all the work they've been able to do thereafter, subsequently unlocking funding from the Acumens and the like. And I think that next piece is quite important because we, through the valley of death with all the startups, you need to get them to a place where they can be able to raise the equity and the debt, especially the debt, to be able to access the RBFs. And so really helping them not only with getting the financing, but also with being able to really look at their financial models and figure out what levers they need to pull and what they need to really be looking at to increase their bottom line and their margins. And then at the same time, really being able to help their teams get the right talent in these markets and in these countries. And then the third point that has been really crucial for us as well is being able to really unlock and catalyze those nascent markets. So we're doing work in, for example, Burundi, where we've invested in one of the pioneer companies in clean cooking. And with the work they've been able to do there over the last 2 years, we're able to now then take that information and all the experience from the field and pass that on to like the World Bank designing programs, their governments designing policies, and we're able then to see our funding really play a key role in those 3 areas. And hopefully as we get to see more innovation and as we get to really understand, for example, ethanol now is the next big wave in electric cooking, then being able to come in really early and help these companies really get to those new markets and then hopefully help the sector grow as a whole.
Okay, thank you so much for that. I think that the EAP program has done wonderful work, particularly in de-risking some of the early stage companies. I think as you mentioned, the valley of death, right? There's significant gaps in the funding cycle. So I think you've helped a lot of companies, and we, with our instrument, the Modern Cooking Facility for Africa, have seen the benefits of that because we're seeing some of those companies graduating to instruments that would work towards scaling. So thank you for that. And then I think we'll maybe have the questions at the end. I'll then move to Faisal. And Faisal Hussein is Senior Director. He's working with a lot of innovative financing instruments and mechanisms for the Clean Cooking Alliance. Faisal, maybe if you could just frame some of the topics that we're talking about here from the CCA perspective, please.
Working. So I think maybe a good place to start is this $10 billion sort of funding every year that we require. Those of you, of course, who've in the clean cooking space, we're so far away from it. If we carry on in the current trajectory of both public and private money, it will take us to 3010 before we achieve universal access, right? So and the need for financing has been made clear by the first panel that we had this late morning that we had. The challenge, I think, that many of the advocacy work can't address is that money flows, and there's a particular logic for why money would flow, right? It doesn't flow just because it's a good thing to have in society. Otherwise, we would have lots of money for health and education and so on, right? So we've been very kind of concerned and obsessed about how do we get money to flow faster and create the logic for money to kind of come in. So what is the first foundational issue for us is that the economics of clean cooking doesn't work for customers because they're priced out, the equipments are too expensive. It doesn't work for companies because it takes too much money to operate and get the solutions out to people. And it doesn't work for investors because many of the companies remain unviable, apart from a few, and they don't have sufficient scale, and there is no underlying asset, which is customers who are buying and selling and paying for services. Those three things that you need for money to flow just doesn't exist. What's interesting is that in an ordinary market, it's usually public funding has to create that market, and that role has to be there. But what we've seen is that public money, I think in about 2 years ago, was about $70 million a year, right? And that's been more or less a little bit up, a little bit down, and it's, and the instruments are different. Sometimes it's sort of RBFs and so on. But anyway, it's more or less 70 million. But what's been completely transformational is that a lot of private money has come in. But actually, so for example, last year, we've had most record private investment, which is about $215 million in 1 year. We've had the record revenue from companies, which is about 87 million in 2021. So something's happening for why private capital is coming. And when you sort of unpack this a little bit more, what's really driving it is what's happening in the carbon market right now. Because in the last 4 or 5 years, the carbon market has grown probably, I have the data. It's grown significantly. It's grown about 40 times over the last 4 years. So there's no other form of financing that has grown as fast. So we think that can be transformational, and what we're seeing, the projection, is that by 2030, carbon markets will be generating $12.5 billion a year. So that's not just the 10 billion that you require, but it's $2 billion extra from what's required, right? Lots of projections and so on, but that's where it is, right? But of course, carbon market has a shelf life, right? So what we think is that there is a window of opportunity to harvest the carbon revenue as a way of really building viable companies, building the scale that you need to get investors to kind of come in, so that when the carbon revenue starts falling off, that you have other forms of more traditional forms of financing coming in, including many of the benefits of what we call social value credits, sort of the equivalent of carbon, but for health and gender and time and so on. So if we could monetize that and have that coming along, that's really important. So for us, what's really important is that we need to get lots of investors to come on board, and that will require de-risking, not just in the traditional guarantee sense of financial risk, but sovereign risk in a country, financial risk, delivery risk, really to bring in that risk lens in how we structure the work in the country so that both private money comes in, but also government money, because we want public money to be not taking huge risks and failing, but we want that money to achieve impact as well. So,
okay, thank you so much. I think that we're seeing a lot of innovation from some of our investees. We're seeing that there's a lot of new structures out there. There's pre-financing of carbon coming online. There's a lot more risk. I mean, I've been working with the carbon markets for over 20 years, and that sort of interest was missing even in its heyday. So I think it's great to see that there's pre-financing of future receivables coming online. So if I move to Peter. Peter, you're a partner and investment director at Spark Plus Africa Fund. We need more risk capital in this market, right? Some words from you, maybe.
Sure. Thanks, Ash. Great to be here. As Ash said, I co-manage a fund called Spark Plus, it's called Spark Plus Africa Fund. It's a fund that was launched out of work that I was doing with the Clean Cooking Alliance over a number of years. And it essentially is lending to companies in the clean cooking value chains. So across all different technology types, across all of sub-Saharan Africa, we are lending to everything from stove manufacturers to LPG distributors, LPG cylinder manufacturers, carbon project developers, electric cooking appliance distributors, really anything you can think of, microfinance institutions that are lending to customers to acquire clean cooking appliances, which, as Faisal said, still remain unaffordable for much of the market. Just about the fund, it's a public-private partnership in a sense. It's money from a mix of DFIs, African Development Bank, the European Commission, IFU from Denmark, Bio from Belgium, DFC from the US. I think I covered all the DFIs. I hate to leave one out. And then family offices, foundations, and 4 pension funds. So it really is a structure that was very difficult to put together. It took several years. But what it does is it blends private capital that needs to see a return. Obviously, pension fund recipients don't want their pensions to be invested in poor investments, so that's very important that the private capital achieves its aims. And that's enabled through the concessionality of the public money. So it has multiple tranches. The fund has multiple tranches that take different levels of risk and achieve different levels of return. So that's essentially how the fund is structured and what we're investing in. And to your point, Ash, I mean, what really, and Faisal spoke to this, what really is needed is risk capital. I mean, we are a debt fund, so we're lending. Nobody lends to companies that don't have a solid equity base, that don't have equity investors who believe in the long-term prospect of the company. Why would you as a bank, lend to a company that nobody believes in? So you need people who believe in the company and show that belief in the form of equity investment. And so that's what's really needed, and that's, to your point, it's risk capital, right? Equity is risk capital. It's the guys who lose their money if the company goes bankrupt. The creditors, the lenders try to grab what they can in terms of collateral, in terms of assets. The equity loses everything. So they're the ones really at risk. And it's challenging to sort of prescribe how we attract more risk capital into the sector, aside from making the business models more attractive, right? Making them more viable, more sustainable, more attractive for people that are looking at equity investments in real estate and, roads, infrastructure, all sorts of things, to say, I would rather put my money into clean cooking, into cocoa networks or Sistema or, burn manufacturing or carbon projects being developed, as opposed to putting it in other business models. And carbon is a real key driver there, right? Without carbon, it's very difficult to serve these communities, to make these products affordable to consumers, to make the business models viable for companies. So we're really, very focused on carbon markets. Obviously, a lot needs to happen in terms of making these carbon credits more high integrity, making them really good carbon credits, as opposed to what they are currently, which is sort of middle of the road to not so great in terms of the certainty that a buyer of a ton of carbon has around that ton representing a ton of carbon emissions reduced. So there's a lot of work that's being done. I think the work that CCA continues to do around this on the methodology side is super important. And a lot of actors, the ratings agencies, us as funders, as investors, everybody has a role to play in order to make, to take advantage of this opportunity, which isn't a forever opportunity, and we need to use this as a bridge to sustainable business models over the long term, but it's a huge opportunity, and we need to make clean cooking carbon a really attractive asset for corporates and for governments under Article 6.2, I always get 6.2 and 6.4 confused, but under 6.2, I think, to purchase carbon credits, as Click Foundation from Switzerland is doing. Other countries like Singapore and others are looking at carbon credits. So we feel like there's a lot of progress already and a lot of work to do to continue to grow the market.
Okay, thank you so much. I think the carbon markets have been facing some headwinds of late, and I think the core of that really is the environmental integrity So I think there will be a lot of development in this space. So, but I think the key issue is really that this is new money. You know, we're struggling to get funding into the market, so we've got to be careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. You know, so it's important to try and reach some sort of balance there. Okay, so thank you for that, Peter. So I'll now move to Lunis Badawi. Lunis is a senior country manager with the OPEC Fund, and I know that you've just come back from Madagascar, even late last night, I believe. So I just would like to hear your reflections on the financial instruments that are most relevant in this space, in your view, and and what sort of experience has the OPEC Fund had with clean cooking?
Yes, thank you so much, Ash. Yes, so essentially I'm in charge of a portfolio of countries in Southern and Eastern Africa. Madagascar is one of them. Actually, I've shared a small promotional video that's silent. It's just for the background, so maybe if the technical team can screen it. Essentially, what we've been doing at the OPEC Fund in terms of clean cooking is really beyond, of course, the availability of capital that we have directly to finance through grants and through government loans the infrastructure that's needed for clean cooking. We're also trying to position ourselves as a consolidator of partners, because what we've identified is that a lot of organizations are interested in the field of clean cooking, but they don't communicate with one another so well. So what we end up having is a lot of tiny, scattered, clean cooking operations, and these tend to not succeed very well because it's very risky, it's very costly, and there's a lot of economies of scale and a lot of potential synergies that could be gained if our different organizations could just, join forces and organize things in a structured manner. And in terms of the instruments that we have as the OPEC Fund, of course, we finance governments through sovereign loans. We also give grants to national and non-governmental entities for the implementation of projects. We also have a private sector window whereby we finance the private sector directly. And we are more and more looking at more innovative financing solutions. And actually, we've been discussing with Spark Plus for the past year and a half now. We're very, very impressed with the work that's been done. And since we're talking about de-risking, which is fundamental to provide, to encourage private capital to flow into these projects, I believe that the structure that Spark Plus Africa Fund is promoting is ideal, because it provides this first loss tranche that will pool more capital and will make these private investors more secure. So de-risking, of course, is central. Another way that you can de-risk is, and this is one of the things that you discussed at the beginning, Ash, is the necessity to also pool public capital into the equation. Because one of the reasons why private sector shies away from clean cooking projects in these countries which need it the most is because the infrastructure is not there. You see? So that makes it even that much more risky for them. And I don't know if Camille from ANCA is here, but we've been working with innovative companies and with the government, essentially. It's not really a PPP, it's more of a it's a bit of an innovative way to support the private sector indirectly by providing matching grants to project providers, like she was with us, to essentially build infrastructure that's missing for them to actually make their projects successful. So this type of cooperation between the private sector, the public sector, and the international development community has proven very successful. So what we've done with ANCA is actually to install mini-grids in very remote areas of Madagascar, actually. And what we're looking now, that we are moving to the phase that's more directly connected to clean cooking, is to see the extent to which we can connect these mini-grids to electric appliances. And so we're entering now the proper phase of our clean cooking program. We're partnering up with UNIDO, with SE for All, with also all types of developmental organizations like the World Bank, other UN agencies, IFAD, the International Fund for Agricultural Development. And we're really trying to get a group of like-minded institutions, organizations, and individuals to work towards the same goal. So this was one aspect. The second aspect, to make sure that we can raise this capital successfully, is to raise awareness. And that's the reason why we're working on the ground with the Vienna Energy Alliance under the supervision of UNIDO, to go close to the population and to identify their needs and what can convince them to actually switch to clean cooking. Because if you provide the appliances, if you provide the technology, but there's no one to get it, or it doesn't stick, then you have not accomplished anything. So the promotion has a double purpose. First of all, it is to convince the population that it is for their own good. And you can only do this if you're very close to the population on the ground. You understand the cultural dimension, that why are they attached to traditional cooking? They don't realize, they don't see it the way we do. They're attached to their traditional values and their traditional way of cooking. So there's a lot of work on the ground to make sure that adoption is going to work. The other aspect that's necessary, that promotion enables, is fundraising. Because although clean cooking, we're all aware of the immense impact connected to clean cooking in terms of environment protection, in terms of health, in terms of gender equality, education, economic opportunities, but it's still obscure for a lot of people. So communicating it, stressing the immense impact, and structuring projects that not only showcase this impact, but also, because they're so well structured, can generate the carbon credits that are needed to add more financing, will also generate interest from investors, impact investors in particular, and also non-profit organizations, philanthropies, international organizations. So that's what we're trying to do in a nutshell. And I'm very pleased and honored to be part of this panel and this initiative. And I hope that together we can really make a difference. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Linus. I think you've highlighted a lot of. Yes, please. Sorry, thank you. You've got to clap for the other guys as well, right? Don't forget that. Anyway, so I think, yeah, you made some great points there, Linus, and a lovely video as well. I think that it is very important. This asset class is something that people struggle with, and I think that it's seen as being a very esoteric area of investment. I think we need to do more. I think, as you're right, we need the right stories and so forth, the communications, but we also need to demonstrate the robustness of the financing models. We need to prove the revenue model, right? We need to show that this can actually turn a profit for companies. And if we have time, we'll come back to this topic. If I can come back to maybe Faith and Peter on this, but I'd like to move to Harry Stokes, who's the Executive Director of Project Gaia. Harry, you've had a lot of experience with bioethanol. What are your views here in terms of how we can bridge the funding gap? And maybe you could give us an example of what you've been working with.
Sure. We've been working since 1995 in trying to popularize alcohol fuels. These are liquid fuels that give us the opportunity to transition away from petroleum or fossil fuels. Obviously, we need liquid fuels. We can't rely only on electricity. And we really want to move away from our traditional fossil fuels. So the alcohols offer this opportunity. So we've been working quite extensively with UNIDO on ethanol, and we served as the technical support team for UNIDO in Tanzania. So I think I'll frame my remarks on funding and finance around the UNIDO project. So the UNIDO project was designed to solicit and support truly African businesses, African-owned businesses, businesses that don't already have an investor from Europe or the U.S. or Australia or Israel or wherever driving the process, but truly African entrepreneurs who want to get into the business of cooking, and who knows the market better than African entrepreneurs. So the UNIDO project was designed to bring African businesses into an environment called a market enabling framework, where they could receive the equivalent of carbon finance support to purchase cook stoves, provided they could put the rest of the supply chain together. One aspect of the UNIDO project was a guarantee fund, which was meant to help reduce risk in building out infrastructure, especially fuel and supply chain. The UNIDO project is still in mid-implementation. It's now trying to bring in additional entrepreneurs to service the Dar es Salaam market. And then gradually it will spread out through the country. The first implementer, a business called Consumer's Choice, is a woman-owned African business. They've put over $1 million of their own equity into this cook stove business, and so far they've had no financial help from outside, but they've come to the point where they really need it. So one of the things I want to emphasize is that where do we find finance for these businesses? Sometimes we find it right under our nose in terms of the equity that local entrepreneurs, local business people can bring to a project, provided they also get some help. And I like to describe the UNIDO project as a wraparound project. It provides not only financing to help purchase cook stoves in large volumes, to jumpstart the market, it also provides all kinds of technical support to support that local business to put that business together. Now, a business, most African entrepreneurs cannot secure carbon finance. It's very difficult to do so, and while it might have been more interesting to get a piece of the carbon finance action through the voluntary market 9 to 12 months ago, today there would be little value in engaging a carbon developer who can only pay $3 or $4 or $5 per ton of carbon to a local business. It costs more than that just to get the carbon finance program in place for the business to have its CPA and exploit carbon finance. So I think one of the things that we've been looking toward is the new Article 6 provisions, especially Article 6.2. We'll see what happens with Article 6.4, which is more kind of a replication of CDM. Article 6.2 envisions these partnerships where different supporters come together to provide this type of wraparound service in exchange for the carbon finance that will eventually come from the project. Maybe not come in the first couple of years, but will eventually come from the project. So sometimes the carbon finance can't be the early capital because it's too hard to put it in place. It has to come a little bit later. And I'm hoping through the Article 6 programs that more systems can be created that will enable the carbon finance to flow more easily and with fewer overheads than we've seen in the voluntary carbon market.
Okay, thank you so much, Harry. I think that, as I said before, I believe there's a lot more a lot more to come on Article 6.2. It's a very interesting model, particularly when you're looking at working government to government. There's you have a lot more latitude in terms of what you can achieve, and I think we'll hear more on that.
Yeah, and
at
I should say a lot more buy-in from the government. And we see today with the voluntary carbon market, the African governments are saying, hey, all this carbon, all this value in carbon is flowing outside of the country. We're not getting any piece of it. And so you see governments putting new regulations in place to cause some of that value to flow directly back to government, whether in fees or tariffs. And that's going to make the voluntary carbon market a bit more problematic.
Yeah.
It's taking value out. Maybe it's justified that the governments want a piece of that value, but that means less value for the carbon developer.
Yeah. No, that's a very good point. I'm just conscious of time, and maybe I can move to Michelle. Michelle, you're a senior specialist at the World Bank. You've been working for quite some time with ESMAP and on the clean cooking side. Maybe you could share your perspectives, particularly particularly interested to hear your views on how we can best use the limited amounts of public financing for de-risking. And maybe if you had any comments also on issues related to how we can leverage some of the other SDGs as well. So please.
Sure, thank you. I think I will divide my thoughts in two parts. The first one, I will come on the details of the ESMAP, because I guess ESMAP do a job trying to put together and to leverage public funds. And after, I would like to, maybe because everybody's talking about carbon market, and I guess we could spice a little bit the discussion. Of course, it's an important thing, but there is some limits also that we need to take in account. So for the first part, just when you think about ESMAP and the work we do, it's basically we use some grants to leverage development funds that work with government and then develop the market through the government for in the policy perspective, and also through loans. At this map, just to have the numbers, we have co-financed around $60.65 million, which is great if you think about how far we come. But if you think about how much we need to achieve the 10 billion, we see that's a huge gap. And what we observe, it's a really need to scale up. And how to scale up? One part, for sure, it's private, the private sector, and carbon finance may have a really big role on that. But when you talk about the benefits, that what we heard today morning, basically you talk about the decrease of the emissions of CO2, but it's not the biggest benefit of clean cooking. The biggest benefit of clean cooking, even if you put it in the value of health, the value of time, the gender, the big challenge is how to, that was Faisal was saying, how you monetize it, right? And there, I guess it's important to separate two things, financing and funding. Because financing, you need to find the instrument, you need to de-risk, you need to find a way, the best instrument. And the best instrument can have different forms, depend on the country you are, depend on the instruments that already exist. But the funding, that's a really important part. The funding, we need to have some grants. The economics of clean cooking, most of the time, is not it's not sustainable by its own, and understand that it's really important. Why? Because clean cooking have a climate component, are really important, but also have a poverty, a vulnerability component, and that's why it enters with the other SDGs. So that's something that needs to be also considered when you think about public policy, public funding, or how we can solve it together with the private sector, of course, but need to be considered. And when you think about funding, climate finance, through carbon market or other kind of climate finance, because you have different climate funds, need to be looked on clean cooking, because there it's a way that you can decrease the CO2 emissions through a more just and climate just mechanism. So you are looking at, you are impacting the most vulnerable while, but there is, I guess, two elements to consider. One is that we need to look on the sustainability of the clean cooking. So when you do a mechanism that's just, it's just important to start the project or to change the stove, it does not make that clean cooking program to work. So when you think about financing and funding and the instruments, we need to think on the sustainability and the continuity on the long term for this actually be the service that we need. So we need to think in kind of a public service. People need to be able to cook. So this is the kind of long term we need to take in account. And also it's important to think about so this long-term sustainability on one hand, and the other hand, the different situations that you may find. There is some situations that you don't need public fund because the willingness to pay of people, it's enough to fund it. It's just find the good mechanism or the infrastructure that's missing. So that's a way. There is other situations when there is a really high vulnerability. That's if you can find a way to finance it, but if you don't fund in the long term, it will not work. So it's really important to consider the different context and the capacity of people to pay it in the long term, not as a one-stop project, one-stop investment. We like to think like this because it's much easier, right? But what we see in the numbers that we need to have a continuity. It's a service. It's not one-stop investment.
Thank you, and I think it's very important to recognize that. I think what we're seeing is that there's a lot more interest in trying to dare I say monetize those other benefits. It has been tried. But I think the real issue is trying to get, well, let's say mainly the donors to try and look at ways of supporting that. And I know there was the good work that was done by Cardano, the development bond and so forth. Okay, I'm also conscious of time. I would like to come back to this issue of the business model because, and I think Michelle, you sort of touched on it, in a way, because the elephant in the room, I think, is always about affordability. The affordability of these stoves, and particularly where we're working with higher tier, so 3, 4, 5 on the framework scale. So how you can reach these base of pyramid customers, just to get some views from Faith. I know you're working with a lot of these. What kind of business models are you seeing that could reach those types of consumers? And maybe Peter, you could follow up with that as well.
Yeah. I'll give 2 examples. One is a company called ACE, Africa Clean Energy, and they're in Lesotho. And we funded them to pilot having an IoT device that enables both pay-go, so the customers... Could you
explain what an IoT device is to our colleagues?
So it's just a USSD gadget that they put on the cook stove, and you can plug in a smartphone. And what they're able to do is have their agents in Lesotho, they're now in Kenya and Uganda as well, go around every month, for example, and collect data on the usage of the stove. And it does 2 things. One is enables the customer to pay, because it's on a pay-go model, so creating affordability. And number 2 is collect enough data, and on the back of that, they're able to validate the usage, which has been a really big challenge when it comes to carbon credits for cook stoves especially. Emerging Cooking Solutions has also piloted the same, but between the 2 companies, we're beginning to see them be able to just get more attention from investors that they would normally not get attention from, because they are clean cooking. And so ACE, for example, has raised financing, now equity from an investor that is very interested in the technology perspective. The other one, and you mentioned Sistema, in relation to Sistema. So we funded them to mainly figure out how to provide asset financing for their biogas to women customers, and also provide productive use. And what that has done is 2 things. One, they got a premium for their carbon credits because of the gender aspect, which is exciting to see as a possibility. Right. I think the first in the space. And then also what they've now been able to do with the productive use is really diversify their revenue stream, because now they're able to do chaff cutters and they're able to do water heaters for the smallholder farmers who then use that for milking and for pasteurizing the milk. As a result of that, I think for both companies, we are seeing the unit economics a little more attractive than other companies, but testing out these different revenue streams and ways of either making products affordable or increasing revenues for the company is seeming to be in a lot of ways helping them be more attractive to financiers.
Thank you. Some wonderful examples there. Great. Peter, do you think PayGo can be a game changer in this sector as well?
Well, so I think that PayGo is definitely a big part of a lot of business models that are very interesting. It's a way of extending consumer credit. Another way is working with microfinance institutions. We're looking at models that involve both. I think that there are a couple things to think about. One is, this market is massive, right? When we talk about the base of the pyramid, it's an oversimplification, and the market that, if you look at many African countries, it's 80% of the population, 70%, 80, 90% that are cooking with traditional fuels. So that is not one homogeneous group, right? That's higher income, lower income, urban, rural, all sorts of different consumers. And so there are different business models that fit for different consumers. Faith mentioned Sistema and biogas, which makes a lot of sense for rural, smallholder farmers because of the other benefits of biogas digesters. I think the other thing to think about is, and this is one that, when I was at the Clean Cooking Alliance, we talked a lot about, from a philosophical standpoint, free giveaways, right? A lot of the carbon projects that are occurring in the market, including one that we financed in Zambia, and that we're proud to have financed, is giving stoves to consumers that are very far away from, a capital city, would not adopt clean cooking or improved, these are very high quality burn manufacturing made wood stoves. They simply wouldn't be cooking with anything but what they are cooking with in the near or midterm if we weren't doing that. So it's being sort of my background and having my worldview, I would rather not do that. I would rather the markets function. But that's the reality. If we don't subsidize to a very high degree and sometimes fully, there will be a huge part of the market that just will remain unserved. So that's another element to think about in terms of the affordability issues for a certain segment of the unserved market.
Okay, thank you so much. Harry, you have a quick point?
Vertical integration in the ethanol space. We heard this morning from a lady from Uganda about the Bukona Agro project, which is producing ethanol from cassava and selling stoves, and they're able to get their fuel down to a very low price, and thus they are extremely competitive with charcoal and wood. So vertical integration, I think, is another approach that's important.
Right, okay, thank you. I just want to be, again, very conscious of time and out of respect for our next panelists. So I'd like to, just in closing, just to say that there's, clearly we need to make a quantum leap in terms of the financing that's required in this sector. And I think what we've heard about this afternoon is some of the innovative approaches and business models that are being taken forward. We're seeing more and more work around building confidence in the marketplace and so forth. But that's clearly we're still fairly early on in this progress. And there's a lot of work to be done. So I'd like to conclude. I'd like to thank all the speakers in the time-honored fashion for their fantastic views, and to thank you all for your attention. I'm sorry I couldn't get to any questions from the audience, but thank you once again.